start. We'll start a little early because I'll cover some stuff that's just basic, setting up, finding locations, and then we'll get into the fishing stuff. So anyway, good morning, welcome. I'm Captain Bob from Sea Rogue Charters right here in Freeport. And we're going to talk today about bottom fishing, really fishing local structure, wrecks, reefs, rock piles for blackfish, fluke, scup, sea bass, codfish, etc. I'm going to give this from a small boat's perspective. I run a 22-foot center console, so I'm not running a big downeaster. So how you fish a little rock pile sometimes is an advantage because you can fish smaller pieces and so forth. We're going to focus a little bit today more so on fluke and blackfish, and the reason being is there's a lot more advances in terms of the way you fish for fluke and blackfish, a lot of different techniques. It's evolved over the last couple of years, and there's more nuances there. And the more you can learn about fluke and blackfish, you can become a better fisherman. Sea bass, porgies, and that, they're pretty easy to catch. There's not that much nuance there, but there definitely is with blackfish and fluke, so we're going to focus on that for a while. I'm going to start by talking about basics. It's sort of the mundane stuff. I won't spend a lot of time. Really, GPS, location, anchoring, drifting, understanding what's under your boat. This is destination fishing. We're not chasing bait. We're not chasing birds. You're going to an area that has been productive at a certain time of the year. You're targeting a certain species. So really, you just want to have an idea of what's under your boat. And the more you know that, the better you're going to be at fishing. In terms of location, what I'm going to talk about today applies to Jones Inlet, Fire Island Inlet, East Rockaway Inlet, any of the South Shore on the western end. And we're basically fishing, for the most part, man-made structure. I mean, the South Shore is basically a giant sandbar. There's not a lot of natural structure that you have out in the east end or the North Shore. But the good thing is there's a lot of man-made reefs, and over the last couple of years, there's been a big investment into adding to the reefs. They've increased the footprint of Hempstead to the west by adding a lot of the riprap from the Tappan Zee Bridge and some rail cars, and they've done the same to McAllister, AB, Rockaway, and Fire Island. So that's a good thing, because for a while New York was behind the 8 ball. You go to Jersey and Delaware, they're constantly adding to their reef systems. They finally did some work for us, and that stuff is all holding fish right away. We're talking predominantly fishing from 40 to 80, 90 foot of water. Some of the deeper drops, there are some natural bottom, obviously angler bank, cholera, middle grounds. There are a lot of rock piles out there. Not a lot, but small little patches that you can fish. If you can find them, you can fish them. If you don't, here's a tip: if you don't know any spots beyond the reef, there's Navionics makes a service where they basically have a sonar of the whole bottom. You subscribe for it. You can actually pinch it, look. You can see little nuances. You push your finger on it, it'll actually give you the coordinates. So you can find some real interesting stuff. Or you can go old school and use the Captain Seagull's chart and do the same thing. So the key is we want to fish bottom. We're fishing structure. Next thing is identifying the bottom. The things that you really need to focus on is a GPS and a good color fish finder. Again, you've always got to understand what's under your boat. It's going to help you anchor on it. It's going to help you drift it. Your GPS becomes the Bible of where you're going to put all your numbers and coordinates, and the fish finder is going to let you see what's on the bottom. And today, with the side scan, with bottom lock, with the chirp technology, it's very easy to read nuances, and I can't tell you, that's really the key. That becomes the TV set that you're monitoring from when you're planning the trip throughout the entire day, and that'll help you create your waypoint database. And when you create waypoints, again, I'm fishing on a small boat. I traditionally anchor with a single hook. Okay, when I find an area is not just one spot. I could fish an area the size of this room. I'll probably put 15 waypoints on it, if not more. You want to know how big it is. You want to know how high it is. You want to know if it's erect. Does it lay east, west, north, south? It's going to help you fish it. It's going to help you anchor on it. So I find a lot of people, they look at I have 5 waypoints on Hempstead. No, you should have 5 waypoints within one little area. Know what's under your boat so you can fish it. Because again, it will impact, as we'll discuss in a little while, how if you're going to drift over things, if it's sticky, if it's non-sticky, and it'll also affect the kind of rigs you're going to use as well. Next is maintain a log. Logs are important, where you fished, time, tide, water temperature, waypoint numbers, etc. Because again, fish are habitual. Fish are going to be at the same spot, come the same water temperature, same angle of the sun, year in and year out. The more information you have, it's going to help you set up for where you're going to go. Especially for blackfish. Blackfish, it changes by the day. And we'll talk about this, where you have your little magic window where they bite at a certain point of the day, and it changes. So you could be at a spot and, you crushed them on the outgoing tide, you go there next week to the same spot you're on the incoming, you get nothing. Doesn't mean the fish aren't there, they're not biting. So a log is really going to help you, especially when it comes to blackfishing. Anchoring, I'll just talk very quickly. I'm a small boat guy. I throw a single hook. For blackfishing, if you can throw double anchors, God bless you. It's the best because you don't want to swing. I'm not asking customers to throw anchor lines, so whatever. But if I have enough waypoints under my boat, even if I'm going to swing a little bit, I make sure that I'm staying on bottom. The last thing you want to have is, half the time you're fishing in mud, half the time you're on bottom. So the more you understand what's underneath you, it'll say, if I have an east wind, here's a spot where I can fish. Keys with anchoring, if you have 200 foot of anchor line or less, you have no business being on the reef. You need 400 to 600 feet of rope. Generally what you do is I go to the waypoint, I go 3 to 4 times past the waypoint. After my boat has drifted, I go in the opposite direction, drop the hook, let it sit back, pull tight on the hook. If I did everything right, the piece should be behind me. I can pay out some line and then, set myself up. You're going to need extra anchor rod for that. Also, if you have a lot of waypoints, if you're on a hook, there may be another piece 15, 20, 30 feet behind you. You can pay out more line and fish another area without having to re-anchor. So I'm just giving a top line on anchoring. Just make sure you have enough line and a big enough anchor, and practice patience. If you don't get it the first time, reset. Sometimes it's going to take a few times. And also, while you're on the hook, if the wind changes or so, sometimes the bite goes dead. Maybe you swung over 20 feet. Now you're not fishing on the bottom anymore. You always got to keep your eyes on the GPS on your bottom to make sure you're staying where you want to be. So that's the top line of all the mundane stuff. But again, if you don't do it, it's going to inhibit where you're going to fish, and it's going to minimize the catch that you can have. The more diligent you are, the more productive it'll be. So let's talk about tackle. Yes, sir.
You got a mic?
I'll talk a little louder. I didn't want to yell because he's recording me, but I'll pick it up a little bit. We're talking about tackle. Years ago, bottom fishing was you had a broomstick, you had 50-pound mono, you had big reels. It was meat fishing. Put a big slab of bait on, and that was it. Today, with the technology and rods, with carbon, with graphite, with reels that are, bait casting reels, the tackle has gotten lighter. The line has gotten lighter, and what's happened is it's made it more fun to catch without sacrificing. We're using rods like this, blackfishing. This rod weighs 14 ounces with the reel. And this is a 10 to 40 pound rod. You catch 15-pound blackfish, you catch big fluke with this all day long. But it's a lot of fun. Because remember, we're fishing the reef. The average fish is 2 pounds, 3 pounds. So you want to have fun doing it. You don't want to. So we're using lighter tackle in general. And one of the themes is going to be the lighter the better. The lighter you are with tackle, the more fun you're going to have, and the more you're going to catch, because the artificials that we're fishing are better fished when you're using lighter jigs and lighter rods. So the good thing about the reef system here, it provides you a year-long opportunity. From when you put the boats in April to when you take the boat out in the end of November. You have codfish, you have blackfish in the spring, you have the sea bass coming through, and the scup in the early, late spring, early summer. Fluke, we're fishing exclusively fluke in the ocean in the summer. And then in the fall again, you're back to blackfish and codfish. So there's always fish. You're only a short distance, 3.5, 4 miles outside the inlets, so you don't have to go far. And you have a lot of, great angling opportunities. You can catch a lot of different fish, and it's all very good table fare as well. So it gives you that whole option of catching a lot of different fish at the same time. So let's start with blackfish. I said I'm going to focus more about blackfishing and fluking because there are nuances there that will help you improve your catch. Blackfish, we're going to have a season again in April. Generally, in the past, the first 2 weeks has been kind of and then usually as the water warms, it gets better. Although we haven't had a winter this year, so it may be good right from the start. I'm fishing a little deeper. I'm fishing the reefs, maybe spots that are a little deeper because the water is still cold. Come in the fall, October 15th or so, you want to fish shallow. The shallower, the better. Then as the water cools, you go deeper and deeper. Blackfish are more active early on in the fall. So there's a lot more smaller fish. They're a lot more active at times. As the water cools, they sort of filter out. The bigger fish tend to settle in. It becomes more of a typical bite where you're fishing deeper and deeper, and probably instead of starting in 40 feet, 50 feet, you may be fishing in 75, 80 feet come end of November and into December. Now when it comes to blackfishing, my typical setup is, again, this is a black hole rod. What I like to do is, and again, all this is light. This is a 20-25. I fish it with a top shot. I usually put a top shot of 10 to 15 foot. Again, it could be 40-pound leader, it can be 50-pound leader. It depends where I'm fishing. If it's bigger fish, I go a little bit heavier. I'm fishing 40-pound, 50-pound braid on this. And then right off the top shot, you put a dropper loop and you snell on a hook, and then here's your sinker. General rule of thumb is I usually put 4 fingers between the hook and the sinker. You want the sinker to sort of come down at least to where the hook to come down to at least where the sinker is, because when this thing's on the bottom, you want the crab to have some sort of contact with the bottom. You don't want to drop a loop up here with the crab's in suspended animation. Blackfish aren't stupid, and blackfish tend to feed top down. They tend to look at their food and they fish downwards, and feed downwards rather. So you want the bait to be as close to the bottom as possible. And again, this is a nice light, fairly light for what it is, and has enough backbone to catch any size blackfish. And this is a conventional rod. When it comes to rigs, I use 4-0 octopus hooks, primarily locally here, and I snell on 40 to 50 pound leader. You can use fluorocarbon. For my charters, I'm using regular. If guys want to use fluoro, that's okay. I use a double surgeon's loop, and that's pretty much the hook that gets attached to the dropper loop. If I usually fish single hooks. I don't use a snafu rig, and there's nothing wrong with it. I just like my profile to be very streamlined. I like the hooks to be close together. If guys want to fish 2 hooks, I use a slider rig, which is basically you snell on your hook, your 4-0 octopus hook. Before you tie the loop, you drop another hook in the same way, so they almost lay parallel to each other. If you want, I can pass them around. And then you put the surgeon's loop. This rig here, I will fish 2 pieces of crab. Alex fishes this one. You put 2 pieces of crab on. You have a very streamlined profile, and it just gives you a shot. If it's a good bite, if they take one, there's another piece of crab for them. But again, you don't have that extra line out there. Snafus work. If guys want to use the double, I'll use this. Anyone want to see it, or? Yeah, just be careful. You can pass it back. You can pass it around. If somebody wants to put fishing a bigger bait, and they want to put 1 crab with 2 hooks, I do a version of the slider. You just do it the other way. Sometimes they call it the sweetheart rig because I don't know if you can see it. The hooks look like a little heart. You just drop it the other way. And then what I will do is I will put both of these in the back of the crab. So you have the crab, it sits nicely in the water, and you have 1 single piece of monofilament going to the main line. About the main line, I attach the top shot to the main line with either an Albright or a double uni knot. The lighter you go, you just got to make sure your knots are good. If your knots are good and your line is good, they'll hold. Another rig, guys who are fishing down in Ocean City and now going after big tog use this rig, which they call the Belmar rig, and everybody claims to have the original Belmar rig. And I don't know if this is the original, but some old timer told me, so I'll take his word for it. It basically is a very simple rig to tie. You go off the top shot, you take it and you double it up. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll pass it around. You double it up to here and you just do 2 overhand knots. So now you have a double leader here. And the purpose of this is it gives you more flexibility, which is why you use top shot anyway. Braid doesn't have any forgiveness. The more top shot you have, the more flexibility you have, especially when you catch big fish when they dig. Then what you do is you take the double line, and afterwards I'll tie one for you if you want. You take the double line, and then you take the double line and you take this hook here, put it through, and then you put this hook, you put the double line through the eyelid. I'm not going to pull it tight because this rig is tied already. Through the eyelid, and then you put the hook through the 2 double lines and you pull it tight. You hold it then, as I said, I'll tie it for you later. You hold it then, and then you take the sinker and you go over the line 2 times with like a hitch. And this is what you wind up with. And what you do is you see the nice T-handle on it, the rig hangs out, you have a double line here, and as I said, when you're going for big blackfish, it gives you extra flexibility, extra support. So this is 50-pound leader, so you got 100-pound, and this usually goes up, depending on how deep it is, 3-4 feet. You don't want to go too high with it. But it's a very strong rig. Again, usually when you're targeting big blackfish, there's really not a need necessarily around here all the time, unless you're going trophy hunting, you're trying some spots, and you think there's some big fish. If you guys want to pass that around?
I got a question. It's sticking out like that because you're using higher.
No, it's sticking out. I'll tie one. It's sticking out because what you're doing when you first make the connection, you gotta hold it.
Yeah.
You're taking the sinker and you're putting the sinker over like this, and you're putting 2 hitches on it, which holds it out. So when you pull it all together, you have the connection between the hook and the loop, and then you have the connection downward from the sinker. That's why when I usually make this rig, I put the sinker on first, because you want the 2 legs of the leader to be the same. So usually when I have the double, I put the sinker on, and then you start working it through.
That's not your typical drop over at all, right?
No. But it sounds more complicated. It's so easy. It's so super easy to tie. All right. Let's talk quickly about. Let me just have a sip of water. Let's talk quickly about setting up. This is where a lot of people, I fish with a lot of different folks on my charter. Some guys are excellent black fishermen. Some people are learning. And I always tell people, always fish with somebody who's better than you. If you're good, you'll be better. If you're better, you're going to be great. There's always little nuances. But some of the mistakes that I see is people, when they fish, they do this. Boats going up and down. What's happening to the sinker? The sinker's going up and down. Rule 1, blackfish, keep the sinker still. You're not jigging. We'll talk about movement and fluke in a while. You want the sinker to stay on the bottom. Sometimes on a rocky boat it's a little tough. I usually tell people you fish like this, hold the pole at 430. So when the boat goes up, you can actually sort of go up with this, and that sinker is staying on the bottom. So you're not bouncing it up and down. Plus, when you're fishing this way, let's assume you get the traditional bite, which we don't always, but you get the whoop, whoop, and the thump. When you fish this way, it gives you room to go up and set the hook. So usually when you say swing, you go up this way. But what happens is with a lot of people, I got a fish, let me tuck it under my, they go like this and they go like this. You've just given that fish 4 feet back. You got a big blackfish, game is over. No, I'm stuck. The other thing about, if you fish this way, when I tell people, push. The pole becomes a fulcrum. You get a nice bite, swing up, push down. Go like that. Now you have control of this rod. The rod's not going down. Your arm is locked. You got a big fish, you know right away. This thing is pumping. You don't look. You want to get as many. I usually do. Put it in your gut and just turn as fast as you can. You want to get 5 or 6 turns. You don't want to sit there and go, look, guys, I think I got a big. You're going to be dead. Get a couple of cranks on it, get him off the bottom. By then, sometimes the boat will turn, and you'll see he's, because when he's going, when you're feeling this, that's the tail. You're feeling the head and the tail. He's going down. So you can get a couple of cranks, get this thing 10 feet off the bottom. Then he sort of like levels out. The boat moves. Then you can, go back to a more horizontal position, and then reel accordingly. Don't pump the line, especially if you have a sinker. Think about it. You're pumping a line. Now you have a fish on there. You have an 8-ounce sinker that's going nuts. Just reel. You got a nice fish, and chances are if it's a big fish, he's going to dig back down again. He'll take line. Just hold it firm. But try to remember this when you're up there. When you're fishing, this way. None of this. Fish this way and push down. If you push down, when you got a big fish, your rod can't go anywhere. You've locked your arm. And I usually fish this way. I mean, if it's a small fish, okay, but you'll know if it's a big fish or not. In terms of the bites, we all want that traditional blackfish bite, the thump, the whoomp, and then you lift up. Many times you don't get it. You get a lot of times it feels like somebody's doing this with the line. I call it the guitar string. You get this shit all day. Say, what the hell? And you go up and your crab's, mutilated. You go back down. I usually go down a couple of times to see, let them eat a little bit to see if they turn on. If not, then you're going to have to adjust your swing a little bit. You may have to swing a little early. You may not get that right swing. So just be cognizant of what the bite's doing at the time. You don't always get that right bite all the time. And again, this is where your log comes in. Your log comes in handy. There are days when, I call it the magic window where the blackfish will bite. It's usually not all day. Sometimes it's tide dependent, sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's in the late afternoon. That's why when people say, I want to do a half-day blackfish trip, I say, it's a waste of time. The bite turns on at 11 o'clock, I'm pulling the hook and we're going home. You don't know when it's going to come. When it comes, you just got to be ready. You got to make sure you're rigged up, you got your different outfits, and especially with double-digit fish. If you get a couple of double-digit fish, chances are you're going to get those fish in a close proximity to each other. It's just, that's what they are. Blackfish are more finicky than sea bass, fluke, and all that. The tide affects them. The tide affects them and everything else. So just be cognizant. There are times when, as I said earlier, I'll fish a spot where I know there's fish there. It's wrong tide. Try another spot. Don't be afraid to come back to that spot later. They'll just turn on. And it's amazing. There are days they're finicky, and all of a sudden they bite like sea bass. Now, in terms of bait, green crabs are probably the easiest. They're accessible. They're perfect bait early on in the season. Later, as the water cools, the fish go a little bit deeper. They settle in with bigger fish. The white leggers, the white crabs can be very effective. The thing to keep in mind with white leggers, though, later on, if you're fishing and all of a sudden one guy puts white crabs on the boat, and sometimes the white crab will just turn off the green crab bite. So if you have white crabs, make sure you have enough for everybody. Because I've been on party boats where a guy throws white crabs, the guys with green crabs, you ain't getting any bites. Sometimes the white crab, especially when it's cooler, will turn off a green crab bite because they really, for some reason, that water gets cold, that's really what they want. But for 90% of what we do around here, green crabs are fine. How do you fish them? I usually start legs off, cut them in half, shell on. Let's start. We have a starting point, and just observe. Some days they're more finicky. You take the shell off, see what happens. So if they're really chewing hard, I leave the damn legs on. It doesn't matter. Look at what's going on, and with this kind of fishing, observe what other people are doing. If somebody's catching them and they're taking the shell off and have no legs, well, you take the shell off and have no legs. Humility's fine. Listen, watch what other people are doing if they're catching. In the spring, I still use crabs in the spring, but in the spring you can also use clams. Soft baits do work, but I'll use crabs, pretty much for the whole month of April. The other thing I should have mentioned with bouncing, I said don't bounce. Blackfish don't want the fish to bounce, don't want the bait bouncing. Also, the more you bounce, you're going to attract dogfish and you're going to catch sea bass. So you want, that's why if I've been on boats where guys are bouncing, I get as far away from him as possible, because all you're doing is it's a dinner bell for any dogfish in the area. Keep the bait still. So that's pretty much, if anyone has questions, let me know. I mean, that's pretty much conventional fishing. It's how I grew up. It's really what I do best. I'm getting involved in jigging. I'm okay at it. I fish with guys who are much better than me, and I'm always learning. And that's the thing with all this fishing. Fish with people who are better than you. Learn from them. Watch what they do, and you'll become a better fisherman. Now, when it comes to jigs, it's sort of a misnomer. You're not jigging it. It's just basically a little tog jig. That on days, this jig will outfish people, 5 to 1. You're fishing a very, very light setup. I mean, this is a jigging world, 10 to 40. I have 20-pound braid on here with probably a 30-pound top shot. Some guys go even lighter. Some guys go even heavier. Some guys will go with 40 pounds. It depends where you're fishing. The trade-off with this, I mean, once you get the hang of this, it's a blast catching them, is if you get a big fish, am I going to get them up? I've seen fish to 14 pounds caught, 15 pounds. Guys catch them all the time. You got to make sure your knots are good. You got to make sure you have the right line and everything else. I change the top shots after every trip. But you got to fish light, because with this, it's all becoming in tune with the jig. Everything you've learned about black fishing, throw it out. Throw it away. This is a whole different animal to fish a jig. Because what you're doing here is, unlike a sinker that's a sedentary with a crab, this thing sort of meanders along the bottom. We're fishing jigs 3/4 of an ounce to 2 ounces. Anything over 2 gets a little heavy. So, you're casting this up tide, and, and there's certain conditions for this. If the tide is ripping and it's too deep, you're not fishing a jig. But if the tide is right, you fish a jig, it sits on the bottom. You have a piece of crab on here. You're using it the same way with a half of a green crab, and it sort of meanders on the bottom a little bit. I mean, it's not staying still. I mean, it'll go with the current, and it almost gives it a little bit of motion. It looks like a crab moving around. And what the blackfish will do is, it's going to, again, feeding from the top down, it's going to pick up the jig and swim away with it. You don't get the thump. You don't get that because you're not sedentary. So you have to learn, when you see the line go, when you feel it tight, you just got to swing. It's going to be, to really get good at this, you're going to have a couple of real shitty trips. But you know what? Stay at it, because it'll become second nature to you. When I first learned, what happens is, there's a bite. I have guys, they discard this, they go back to the conventional way because you're comfortable with it. But if you can fish with a jig, it's a lot of fun. And if you're new at it, I would start with a heavier jig. Maybe start with a 2 ounce, so you become a little more familiar. It becomes more of a sinker to you, because again, you have to feel this on the bottom, and eventually you will feel this hitting the bottom. At first, you may not. You're going to wonder, am I on the bottom or not? Become familiar with it. And fish where it's shallow. This started about 20 years ago on the North Shore. Guys were fishing. Guy created these tidal tail, the flat tidal tail jigs. Guys were fishing on the North Shore, 8 foot of water, 10 foot of water, and they were catching blackfish with Asian crabs. And the guy started to come on my boat and they said, "You mind if we use a jig?" I said, "I don't care. I mean, it's your charter. Do what you want." I said, "We're fishing in 60 foot of water," and sure enough, when the tide was right, when the tide started to slack, they were going down. These guys were whaling fish. It was like crazy. And now most young people who start blackfishing, this is what they learn. And then, okay, I'll do the conventional when I have to, because there's a time and a place for both. But give it a shot. A nice light tackle. There's bridges here. The fishing in the bridges in the fall is good. You're fishing maybe 20 foot of water. You'll get the hang of it. At first it's going to be frustrating, but if you give it a shot, it'll be very, very rewarding. Yes?
Can you give a brand your favorite?
Jigs?
Yeah.
That's a loaded question because there's 9,000 of them.
Well, your favorite, like tidal tail?
No, I don't use tidal tails because, I'll tell you why. This is a used one. Most of the jigs today have a flat bottom on them, because again, you want them to lay flat. You want the hook up because this is where the blackfish feed. This is they call it a banana. Some have a football. I tend to, I don't know whose is this. I'm in my tackle box. I tend to like smaller hooks. A company that I like, you can pass that back. This is bottom sweeper jigs. There's very small hook on there. There's so many different ones. You know, the key is, first of all, is size. You want to make sure you can stay on the bottom. Then there's color. They have, you know, blue crab, they have crab guts, they have white crab. From what I've spoken to people who are better at this than me, color doesn't seem to matter. You know, if you feel better getting the one that looks, I mean, his colors. You have neon orange, you got neon yellow, you got, you know, muted green. I mean, you know, if it works for you, you know, use it. But I find unlike fluking with bucktails, where color to me makes difference on certain days, I haven't seen one. So, you know, put the calico jig on, it works better. I haven't found color to make a difference. It's all a matter of preference. It's all a matter of preference. But as I said, if you're starting, I'd err on the side of being a little heavier, and you can work your way back. Last point on the jigs is know where you're fishing. I like jig fishing when I have rock piles or low rubble. If I'm fishing a sticky wreck, I tend to stay away from it. Reason being, you know, you're fishing 20-pound braid. You don't have the stopping power that you have with a conventional. So if you're in a sticky wreck and you get a big fish, listen, big fish have all been hooked before. Once they get a sense that something's wrong, they're going to dive. With a lighter line, you may not be able to pull them out of a wreck. So I like to, on a wreck, I'll tend to yield more towards a conservative setup. But if you're fishing like on Hempstead, there's the old section, which is to the east. It's all low-lying stuff. Jigs are perfect because there's not much for them to really get stuck on. And that's why when they use them, like when these guys use them in Rhode Island, they're just fishing like rocks. I mean, yes, it can be sticky, but it's not like a real, you know, craggy wreck where all of a sudden, you know, you get this thing locked in with a big blackfish. Chances you getting it out is nil. So most black fishermen, when they come on my boat, they got at least 2 rods. They got a spinning setup. They got a conventional setup. Some of them even have 4. Here's my heavy conventional. Here's my light conventional. Here's my heavy spinner. Here's my light spinner. I mean, I have this set up for Fluke. I'll show you in a minute. But this is a light black hole. Feel how light that pole is. I'll go black fishing with that all day. With a little bait caster. I caught fish to 10 pounds on that. It's a light pole. As I was saying, that's the beauty of this. The technology's gotten such that it's the poles are so light, you want to have fun with it. So that's pretty much it with the black fishing. The last point I'll tell you is have a lot of waypoints. Don't keep fishing the same honey hole all the time. You're going to take all the big fish out of it. You know, the more points you have, we go back to the beginning, the mundane stuff, waypoints, this. If you know the fish are in 50 foot of water this time of the year, if you have a little snag, fish it. You know, because, you know, you got to give a spot a chance to recoup itself. You know, if you're pulling a half dozen nice keeper blackfish out, you go there tomorrow, you may have all shorts left. So, you know, be cognizant of that. And any big fish, there's no reason to keep a double-digit fish. You know, blackfish are under pressure. You know, this is a fishery that can be decimated if we get too crazy with it. Unlike, you know, so you get a big fish, bridle it, take a nice picture, you know, and revive it. Most of these fish we're catching in 60, 50 foot of water, 70 foot of water, they'll survive. You know, if the air bladder's out a little bit, you know, hold the tail, you know, revive it like you would a stripe or put it in a net. Give it a chance. 90% of these fish will be revived. There's no sense catching and keeping bigger fish. Let somebody else catch them. You know, so just practice a little conservation. Anything else on blackfish? Okay. So now we're going to switch gears. We'll talk about fluke fishing. Unlike blackfish, where I said you keep it still, fluke are all about movement. It's all about motion. Fluke are natural-born predators. Fluke aren't just lazy fish. Fluke will attack fish. If you, John Skinner, guys have videos, you'll see fluke chase a bait for forever. And he'll come off the bottom 5 or 6 feet. So with fluke, I like to impart motion. Years ago, it was just a big slab of bait. You leave it there with a 3-foot leader. Does that catch fish? Sure, but I like the bucktail, or there's some other options for people who aren't quite fine-tuned with bucktailing that can still produce. The key with fluking, again, we're talking fishing structure and fishing reefs, is finding where to fish. Now again, fluke fishing, you're drifting. You start using these expensive rigs, you're over some heavy stuff, it can become a costly proposition. You lose a bucktail, a couple of fancy teasers, it's $10 a pop. So I like to know where I'm fishing, and I'll tell guys sometimes, let's go a little cheaper. So instead of with all the fancy stuff, you put a couple of these, cheap, feather things with mono with a little hook on there. If you lose it, you're not losing big money. But you want to know where you're fishing. And again, because you have to find fluke, you have to find the fish. I call it the 70-30 rule. 70% of the fish you catch for fluke are going to be coming 30% of the day. There's a lot of hunting with fluke. You got to look around. They may be here. You drift a little bit. You got to find the right pod. And when you find the pod of fish, the key is you want to short drift it. Short drifting is important. If I'm drifting and all of a sudden 2 guys are hooked up, and they got a nice fish, I'm going to mark that spot. You hit the MOB, or I make a mental note of it. I'll go a little further. Then I'll pick up, and the guys are going, "What do you mean? We just caught fish." I said, "No, you caught the fish, half a mile that way, 200 feet that way." You want to work a small pod. That's why you'll see a lot of guys constantly short drift, especially if you got a couple of big fish, because these fish tend to school up with size. Now you have a couple of nice, keeper-sized fish. You can put 4 or 5, 6 keepers, 2 or 3 drifts. You can almost max out. So when you find fish, don't leave fish. Short drift them. And again, knowing where you're fishing. Again, especially when it comes to the hardware. Now, something that I do all the time. People see me anchored up and they say, "Oh, there's sea rogies, sea bass fishing again." I anchor for fluke quite often. Reason being is the fluke sit in the rubble, and I know they're there because when you don't have a tide, you'll catch them. But I'm not going to send 2 guys over the new rail cars in Hempstead, and I'll be tying rigs all day, and it's not fun for them, and it's not fun for me. So often what I do is you throw the hook, you sit up on some real gnarly bottom, and the beauty is you can fish light tackle, because instead of drifting with 8 ounces of lead, you're fishing a small bucktail. You can fish something like this. There are guys who are sitting there in 60 foot of water. You throw a buck, you can vertical jig it, or you can cast out and work it back. These small things with a little gulp tip are deadly fishing the wrecks outside. Now, if you didn't anchor, you got to go to something like this, which is fine. This is a tandem bucktail, which is great. You lose this, how much does it cost? It's not cheap. So if I get a sense I know where the fish are, I'll anchor. Plus for me, if there are guys who the boat's half divided, one guy wants the sea bass, one guy wants the fluke, so the sea bass guy throws clams on it and he's happy. The fluke guy's going to catch his fish. But this is my typical bucktail ocean rig. I like the ball head. Tends to be a little more forgiving if you're in sticky stuff versus a traditional spro head or traditional bucktail head. This is just a grub. I usually tip this with either a 5 or 6 inch gulp. Now this is where color does matter. I mean, there are days where a guy has pink and the guy's whaling him on pink. You know what I tell people? Go in your bag, find something pink. For whatever reason it matters at times. There's another company, Fish Bites. They're all whatever your choice is. They're all different colors. Up top, what I'll do is, again, I'll use a dropper loop and I'll put a little teaser, or I'll put a smaller gulp. These are the 4-inch minnows. And this is what I'm going to use to catch, to do my fluke fishing. On this rig here, this is the same version of it. Again, I like to go as light as I can. If the tide is slack, you go to this. I'm not going to go more than a 4-ounce bucktail. If I have to go more than 4 ounce, I'll show you what I use. But this is a great rig for the bay or for the ocean when you have the right conditions. In terms of season, again, we're talking here ocean. I'm talking end of June through the summer months. When the season opens, the fishing is really done in the bay. From May and the first part of June, you're going to be fishing the bay. So, but again, the same rigs work, just use smaller. I'd even go lighter than this if you can. In terms of bait for these rigs, some guys use gulp, and if you bring, they don't want anything to do with bait. I'll bring my own gulp, and I don't need bait. In the ocean, I like to fish bait. These fluke are feeding on little porgies, little sea bass, magalls. So fluke belly is great, sea robin, bluefish is great. My favorite is porgies. Sometimes when they're out sitting, I'll catch a few porgies. You got to scale them because the scales get on the bar, on the tip of the hook. Porgies are perfect strips. They're nice and silver. They give a nice little sheen to them. They flutter nice, and that's what the fluke are feeding on. So a lot of times with these rigs, even if I have a piece of gulp, I'll put a piece of porgy on it. Sometimes I just put a big piece of fish bait on. Match the hatch. This is what they're eating out in the ocean. In the bay, I'll use spearing. I mean, I always have squid and spearing because there are guys who they're squid and spearing fluke fishermen. That's the way they've done it, and that's the way they're going to continue to do it. But fish bait is the best by far. Fluke, bluefish, mackerel, anything. Cut it up, cut a nice strip, a nice strip, not too long, because again, you're fishing with emotion here. And the thing about when you're fishing the bucktail like this, you're swinging on the strike. So when you're bucktail, you feel the weight, you swing. It's not like, ooh, I got to let him eat. This isn't a 3-foot leader with a big bait. You're not letting him eat. He doesn't want to eat a piece of metal. You're bouncing it. You feel that weight, swing. So then, a lot of times you're going to get that bite when the rig is dropping down a little bit. As I said, that double rig works. So if I'm anchored on the reef, I sometimes, again, as I mentioned, prefer the single, less hardware. You're fishing real sticky stuff, so one hook is generally enough. Now, there are times when I have guys, they're not bucktailers. And if you're not gonna work at bucktailing, it's a waste of time. The guys, they bounce it once and they sort of let it sit there. That ain't working. So then you go to the tried and true bottom fish rig, high-low chicken rig, whatever they want to call it today. And that's what this is. Simple high-low rig. Now these have fancy teasers. These are poison tails from Dominic. I mean, these are fluke candy. They can be pricey if you're fishing heavy-duty stuff, but they're excellent. You can put a piece of gulp on here, put a piece of fish bait on here. The nice thing about this is, with the sinker here, you can adjust the weight. So if you have a fast drift, or if I have people, I can't hold with a 6 and I got to put an 8 on, you can put an 8 on here. But you always want to be as vertical as possible. You don't want to scope out as much as you can. And with this, again, you want to bounce it, but it's a little more forgiving than just working a true bucktail. So high-low rigs, very effective. This will also catch you sea bass. It'll catch you everything else. And again, you can fish with cheaper teasers as well. Now, in terms of hooks, hook size, if I'm fishing, if I'm tying a teaser, or if I'm snelling a hook, if I'm using a gulp, I use a 6/0 bait holder because you want that shaft to hold the gulp. So I use a bait holder hook. If I'm just going to fish a piece of fish bait or a small gulp, I'll use a 5/0 octopus hook. So those are really my go-to. In the bay, I may downsize it to a 4/0. In the bay, you can get away with a 4/0. Because in the bay, you're fishing smaller baits because they're feeding on grass shrimp. Another rig that I use this a lot in the bay. I call it a Montauk rig, and somebody in Montauk told me about it a while ago. I mean, it's really no reason why. This is actually just one piece of leader material, and it works like a high-low. What you do at the bottom is you put on your teaser. Sometimes I'll put a little bead on it, whatever. You can put fancy stuff on here, whatever you want. This one I have a 6/0 bait holder, so I'd probably, in rigging this, I would anticipate putting a bigger piece of gulp. If I'm using something small, you can put a 5/0 octopus hook. You go about, I don't measure anything, I go about that. Well, it's 15 inches. Put a surgeon's loop on here. That's where your sinker goes. Do me a favor, put your finger where that is there. Thank you, just hold it down. Then I'm gonna go up about 15 inches. I do a big dropper loop, well, 6-inch dropper loop, and I put another hook on here, which I could put a teaser on. So this is how the rig fishes. And again, when you go up and down, you get the motion. This rig will keep the bottom hook closer to the bottom hook closer to the bottom. I like this in the bay. Sometimes if the fish are, early in the season, they're tight to the bottom. This is a rig I usually tie for my customers. It's very effective. Thank you, sir. If it's really sticky, I'll probably go to a high-low because this bottom hook, if it's dragging on the bottom, can get you into some trouble. But this is a great rig if you're not fishing sticky stuff. It just keeps, the only difference is it keeps the bottom hook lower. I'll usually put a bigger piece of bait here or a bigger gulp and a smaller gulp here. So it looks like a bigger fish chasing another fish. And Fluke are very aggressive. So when this thing goes by, here's a little bait fish, here's something chasing that. The Fluke beelines, usually you're gonna get most of your fish on the teaser. But as this thing goes by, you have a bait fish, you have another fish, both of which the Fluke can eat. So this sometimes can be very effective as a version of the high-low. And with regard to bucktails comes in all shapes and sizes. As I said, color works. Pinks, whites, they mimic sea robin. I mean, you go to these shows, you can go bananas, and it's whatever you're comfortable with. But always be mindful. If somebody's catching, look at what they're doing. If they're doing, if they have a certain color, put it on. Sometimes it does matter, As I said, my rule of thumb is in the bay, I'll use chartreuse and green. On the reefs, I'll use in the ocean, I usually white and pink. However, I will go darker if I'm fishing structure because, again, on the structure, it tends to be more murky. There tends to be a lot of bait fish there, so that's why colors like nuclear chicken and some of those darker colors become effective as well. Let's see what we got. So the key is, again, like I said with blackfishing, know where you're going to fish. You have a plan. You're going to go out. If you're going to fish real sticky stuff, you may want to use the cheaper setup, a cheaper high-low with cheaper teasers, cheaper hooks. You lose a sinker and a couple of, cost you $4 or $5. If you're fishing somewhere where, it's a little more forgiving, you may want to go with the better artillery. But again, that's all, that just becomes with knowledge, knowing where you're fishing. And what I usually do with people, if I know where I'm going to go, I usually tell people, where you're fishing and, so they can plan accordingly. And any questions with Fluke? Yes?
Yeah. Fluke is, I use Fluke called the poison tail chicken rig.
Yeah?
I used it on the Nantucket shoals.
Oh yeah.
Go for jumbo fluke.
Yep.
Because I do the Nantucket shoal strip for jumbo fluke on the popcorn rigs, those chicken rigs, those poison tails, those Grady's tackle I use.
Yeah.
I use Grady's tackle, those poison tails.
That's where this rig became very popular. I mean, Dominic sells probably half of his rigs up to guys who fish up there, or that's where it became popular on the high-low rig with the poison tails. Because when you're fishing the shoals aren't that sticky, and you
on the Nantucket shoal strip.
Yep.
Fluke, I call it collar banks.
Yep. Yeah, for collar, I mean, there are parts of collar that are sticky,
And
but
banks.
yeah, on angler and middle ground, they're not as sticky. They're perfect. Or on low line, it's an excellent. The poison tails are absolutely excellent.
Right.
All right, so as I said, we spent more time on fluke and blackfishing because there are little nuances that if you be aware of it, you can step up your game, you can really increase your catch. And it just takes time, practice, especially with some of the newer methods. If you haven't bucktailed, try it. Put the time in. So talking about sea bass. Again, if anyone's heard the rumblings, there's another 10% reduction in sea bass they're talking about. 16.5 inches, go figure this one. Which is ridiculous. Sea bass has become such a mismanaged thing, and it's a separate topic for a separate time. But they're looking at 10% reduction. If you want to keep the 16-inch fish, season's going to start July 1st. If you want to keep it June 23rd, it's 16.5, 3 fish. As far as I'm concerned, it's been a bycatch fishery for the past 5 years. I can't promote sea bass charters. It's ridiculous. So fortunately, there's other things to catch. So you catch a few sea bass, you catch your fluke, you catch your other things. You can round out the day. But it's not looking good. They're still mandating a 10% reduction, which is crazy.
You see any fluke changes this year?
I don't think so. It wouldn't be that drastic. Yeah, I think that's going to... Fluke and scup was nominal too. It's just sea bass. Our sea bass has become the red snapper. For some reason, they just mismanage it, and I don't know why. They have something against it, whatever. I mean, if anybody fishes here, you know there's no shortage of sea bass. It's crazy. I mean, they are migrating further north. I mean, they're getting them now in the Gulf of Maine, which have the lobster guys all annoyed. But I mean, the sad thing is, you go to any of our reefs the second week in May, you got 3-4 pound sea bass. And I take guys cod fishing, and so I almost hate to do it. You get 3 codfish, and the guy's throwing back 40 sea bass. They look at me like. It's like, I don't need the aggravation. I'll stay in the bay and go fluke fishing. It's a crime, because you go to Jersey, it's still 12.5 inches, 10 fish, and they have a fishery in May, and May is the time for here. When July comes, most of the big fish are gone.
So Jersey's 12 inches, and where's it going to be 16.5?
Yeah, Jersey's 12.5. They just basically ratified it, and it's in May. Their season closes before ours even opens. You go to the reefs out here, all the commercial boats. A lot of guys are Jersey guys. They come here. Because they bang their reef, and then, well, our commercial guys can fish here too, but it's a mess. You know what? It's almost at a point now we don't even talk about it anymore. But with sea bass fishing, and again, this goes for porgies and everything else. I mean, as I'm saying, there's nothing really spectacular here. It's just a high-low rig, you know, very simple. Dropper loops, 3/0 octopus hooks. I'll use a 2/0 octopus hook for porgies if I'm targeting them. You know, again, the loops are very tight if I'm anchored on a wreck. If I'm drifting, like if I fish middle grounds or if I'm fishing somewhere, what I do is I snell on longer leaders. The reason is, as you're moving, I like the bait to sort of flutter. So sometimes I'll put a clam that has a little more tail to it, or a piece of squid. It gives the sea bass a chance to catch up to the bait. I don't use this anchored up because it's just too much hardware to get snagged. And this is pretty much a standard rig. As I said, the sea bass, you know, they're here in May. We can't fish till whenever. I use clam, fresh clam, squid. In the summer, I'll use spearing. When the sand eels are out, sometimes they love spearing. I just put a whole spearing on. I just put it through the eyes like I do fluke, and I put it in the top of the back, so it makes it a little harder to get off. If you want to get a cheaper way out, clam bellies work too. They're cheaper than fresh. I mean, fresh clams are out of control, but clam bellies are a mess. I do a lot of jigging. If you're looking at the screen and it looks like a giant Christmas tree, there's a lot of fish there, I'll throw a diamond jig down. I'm gonna tell my customers throw a diamond jig, and you can either jig it up and down, or sometimes squidding is very effective, where you just let it go to the bottom, you reel up slow, let it flutter, reel up, you know, a third of the way. And often you'll catch bigger sea bass, because bigger sea bass will venture out further than smaller sea bass. They'll be higher in the water column, they'll be off the pieces because they're bigger. You know, a lot of times I'm fishing tight to structure, and everyone's whaling 12-inch fish. You know, that grows old quick, but you know, they tend to be huddled out. So again, if you have enough anchor line, sometimes I'll drop back off the edge of the piece or whatever it is, fish on the edge, and you'll get bigger sea bass.
Using a wreck anchor, or
no, I use a regular Danforth anchor. Regular anchor. That's the other key too. You got the more spots you have, the more you can anchor. You don't want to throw the hook in rubble. So that's why there are days the wind's blowing a certain way, I can't fish some spots because I'm going to lose my anchor or whatever. That's why the more stuff you do up front, the more your waypoints are, and the more you have it mapped out in your head, the more you can anchor on it, the more you can drift on it. Porgies, basically it's the same thing. You know, our porgy fishery outside Jones, you know, we don't have the quantity that they have on the North Shore and out east, but we do get some really big fish. We do get some nice sized porgies. If you know, when guys want them, I mean, there are spots that tend to hold more porgies, but I can't guarantee that this is a porgy spot and you're not going to catch anything else. Usually when I want porgies, I catch more sea bass. Usually early in the morning and late in the afternoon are better for whatever reason. So if guys want porgies, I may make that my first drop, or if it's an afternoon trip, that may be my last drop. I use the same rigs. I'll probably drop down to a 2/0 Gamagat, 2/0 octopus hook for porgies, but using the same bait, the clams and so forth. Triggerfish, you know, we've had, you know, a pretty good run of triggerfish the last 10 years. 2 years ago was exceptional. Last year was good. Again, to me, it's a bycatch. It's a bycatch for bottom fishing. You know, once July comes, where I'm fishing, you got fluke, you got triggerfish, you got porgies, you got sea, you got everything out there. Cobia now, you got everything out there. Blowfish have come back, but with triggerfish, there are certain spots that hold them. Again, make a mental note. Hey, I fished, spot X, Y, and Z. I caught some triggerfish there. Chances are, if you catch one trigger, you're going to catch a bunch because they do hang out in, pretty good schools, but it's just a nice bycatch in the summer, and they're fun to catch, and they're good eating. Lastly, cod fishing. We've had a resurgence of codfish in the last 10 years. April, May, you go to Hempstead, go to McAllister, there's a lot decent cod fishing out there. Most of them market-sized fish, but we've had fish to 8 pounds. I usually anchor. With the high-low, but on the top hook I may go another 1.5 foot, put maybe a piece of gulp or jelly worm on there. If I drift, I'll drift. If I fish cholera, my rule of thumb is I don't anchor on cholera. I like to drift cholera middle of the hard bottom. So I'll do codfish drifting out there. But you anchor up, you'll catch codfish. But as I said, the frustrating thing now is you go there in May, you're going to catch all the big sea baits you want. It's mine.
Early in the season for codfish, you're better at cholera or you're better at the reefs?
Reef. Yeah, because the water is still, water's still cold. They're inshore. By the time the reef gets good for codfish, my boat's out. Reef gets good usually December and so. I mean, later in the month they start to show, but I'm out by then. But if you go in April, I've had codfish to Memorial Day. So again, when I used to sea bass fishing, it was open. It was great. You go sea bass, codfish, porgies. Now it's.
You can drift them, right? You can drift codfish, or it's just not.
You can drift them. Yeah, you can drift a cod. If I drift, sometimes I'll use a jig. I'll use like a diamond jig with a teaser up top, and you can squid it or jig it for that. But there are decent sized fish out there.
What size codfish are out there?
Most of the fish are 18 to 23. A lot of shorts with the 23, 24. I think the last year we had one about 8, 9, 10 pounds. You do get a couple of decent sized fish. I mean, as I said, you're not going to. Last year we had a day we had 12, but you can't guarantee that every day. I mean, the cod fishing is there. Even now Al was catching them pretty good. He took some time off. It's hit or miss, but the local reefs do hold the fish early on. So, as I said, with that kind of fish, with the sea bass and that, I mean, you all benefit from the light tackle, but it's really it's high-low. It's high-low rigs, whatever. Really focus on the blackfishing and the fluke, because if you really can learn to work a bucktail and eventually get the lighter the better. With bucktails, the lighter the better. You spin a little half-inch bucktail. I'm telling you, try it. If you guys have boats, try anchoring. And just throw a fluke. And what I'll do is if I want fluke, I'll anchor and I'll fish for 10, 15 minutes. If I have nothing there, you pick up. Or if I have 600 foot of line, I'll drop back to another piece. Have the guys bang around. And
You just make a mistake on the reef and it's $300-400 by the time you're done with the line and the anchor.
Well, that's why you have to know where you're anchoring. You always want to put it in the mud. That's why the more you know. But it allows you to fish structure where normally you can't, because I don't have a mate. So if I go over stuff and 3 guys are hung up, it's like, oh, shit. I mean, it's like time lost, it's money, guys are losing expensive rigs. It's not worth it. So give it a shot. And plus, as I said, if you get bored, you throw a sea bass rig. Sometimes half the boat wants to bottom fish anyway. So you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And the nice thing is you can fish with a 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce bucktail. And if it's not too bad, you cast it up and you just sort of walk it back. So, as I said, people.
The structure walking it back, you're going to.
Well, it depends where you're fishing. Again, if you're fishing really heavy stuff, you got to be careful. But sometimes anchoring works, because when you have a 2-knot drift, it's hard. That bait is flying, no matter where you're fishing. The bait is flying. Guys, they're scoped way out. They want 12-ounce sinkers. It's a mess. So you know what? Game over. We anchor up. Everybody can, fish very comfortably, and they catch. And a lot of the guys say we're going to anchor up for fluke today, which makes everybody happy. The sea bass guys get what they want, and the fluke guys get what they want. Give it a shot. It works. So, yeah.
Do you have an opinion on fish finder rigs? Are you using a fish finder?
I don't use them.
Yeah, I just.
No, I mean in Florida they use them.
That's how we started out.
Yeah.
Now you start learning about everything else.
No, I mean with the blackfishing, it's the rigs that
particularly for fluke, I wouldn't use it for black. But for fluke, it was the way I was shown, and
listen,
now it's dwindling out.
Listen, there are still guys who come on my boat, the old timers who give you the stories. They fish with the long leader. They have a leader with 2 hooks on it, and they catch. They put the little spinners on them. Listen, I tell people if you catch fish with what you do, continue doing it. You know, it's just that I try to, when people come on board, I try to get them involved with moving the bait and try to, because it does evoke more strikes, But again, it's always the trade-off where you're fishing, whether I throw a blackfish jig down or do I go conventional. It depends where I'm fishing. That's why all of this is it's sort of a mental map that you have to have in your head when you go fishing. It's a whole different ball game. Guys who chase bass, it's a whole different world. I mean, I'm not, when it comes to bass fishing, I'm okay. If I need help, I call certain people. It's what you do. But there is structure in the bay too. The bridges are actually pretty good for some blackfish. There's triggerfish there too, because they put all rubble under all the bridges about 3-4 years ago, and it really is taken off. So again, if you want to get going with the blackfish jigging, I would say try shallow, try it at a slack tide, so you can get down here with 1.5 ounces, and you'll get the hang of it. And when you get a blackfish on a pole like this. Listen, it's like 10-pound test. I mean, this thing's bent over, and you got 15-inch fish. It's fun. That's what I'm saying. My motto is, you got to have fun with this stuff, because nothing we're catching is giant. Yeah, you want to catch a double digit, but that's the exception. It's not the norm. Yes, sir.
So you talk about colors, and I swear by pink.
Okay.
But it's a known fact that at 15 feet, the color red is totally gone.
Yeah, I know.
So why?
I don't have the answer. Like people ask me too, what are we fishing over? I said, I don't know. I know it as Hempstead 4XY, because it's in my head, Hempstead 4. I don't know what the heck it is. I mean, I know where some of the new stuff is. It's bridge material. I don't know what's color. It's a great question. But I had been on a boat where I've seen guys with chartreuse and they're catching and somebody else is not. And I tell people,
Oh, it works. And I swear by pink.
Yeah.
There is no pink at 15 feet.
No. Listen, a lot of it's in your head too. If you think it's going to work, you're going to fish more confidently, and you know what? Yeah. Listen, it's true. When the bite gets crappy, what happens to people? The shoulders go down. Game over. I mean, we might as well just you got to stay at it. If you especially with blackfishing, fluking, you got to stay at it. Once you give up and go into the cabin and start having a sandwich, game over. So, you Rich?
Tie that double lead.
Yeah. What time is it? Okay. Perfect. If anyone, I'll tie that rig if anyone wants to see that double one. It's very easy to tie.
One on the floor too here, by the way.
Oh, okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you ever fish with peanut butter and ball? Or no?
I do. You know where they work, and again, a lot of times at charters, I have to do what's easier for everybody. You take peanut bunker and you go fish with the bow right into the second loop bridge, all the giant fluke in there. There's a guy in my marina, a commercial guy. He's got that green boat with the steering in the front. He goes right to all you do is you see him by the bridges. He's fishing live peanut bunker. He nets them and he goes right. He gets nice fish in there. So I mean, live bait does work too, but again, it depends on who I have on board. Most of the time with fluke, it's the guys that Sharpies, they like the bucktail, and they fish lighter stuff. Any other questions? All right, I'll wrap up and I'll tie that rig if anyone wants to see it. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
It should be a good season because we had no winter, so hopefully April things should be good.